Okay, I want to kind of go through some of this stuff. First of all, I would say I thought you guys did a wonderful job, and I think you got an opportunity to learn some things. But I want to go back and talk about some of these people that Steve Adelson talked about, and tell you whatever became of them. Okay, I think it'd be a good story. So let's start with Donald Macintosh. Now, Mackenzie, can you tell me who that guy was? What's the significance of Donald Macintosh? I'll tell you this much: he was fought in the Reno. He was killed in the Reno charge. Okay, Donald Macintosh. He was the leader of Company G, and he was the last one out. He didn't get out, but his company was the last one out because he stayed behind with his men with some of significance. Go ahead.
They found the ring with his bone.
They found the wedding ring with his bone in. Here is the ring right here. And I've had this ring on my little finger, and it says DM plus MM equals 66. And it's the ring that was found on the battlefield at the time. And he was the head of Company G, commander of Company G in the Valley fight. That's what they call the Reno fight, is the Valley fight. And he did not survive the Valley fight. And I'll tell you a little bit about what happened to him and where these people ended up. But this is the ring that was found on the battlefield with a finger bone in it. Donald Macintosh's finger bone in the ring. If you want a good book that shows things about the Little Bighorn, if you can find one, they're hard to find, get a book called Little Bighorn Remembered. You'd have to go on eBay probably to find it. You can find them. If it interests you, that's the book to have. Okay, we'll tell you a little bit about him. Now, you don't have to write any of this down. I just want you to kind of listen. He was like all others, originally buried on the battlefield on June 27th, 1876. He was exhumed in July of 1877, a little more than a year later, and he was reburied at Fort Leavenworth National Cemetery in Kansas. He was exhumed again on October 28th, 1909, and is buried in Arlington National Cemetery, and we'll go see his gravesite next year at Arlington. I've never done that because I've never had a class that I had 2 years in a row that would have cared. So we'll go see Donald Macintosh's gravesite in Arlington when we go there. His wife, Molly, received a military pension of $30 a month until she died in May of 1910. And his wedding ring, as I said, was found in a recent archaeological dig. The ring had the following engraved inside: DM plus MM equals 66, and I showed you a picture of it. Okay, tell you a little bit about Charlie Reynolds. Who is Charlie Reynolds, Cody? Who is Charlie Reynolds?
He was the guy that had the Dr. Lee's, right?
That's good that you remembered that. Perfect. Let's go back, though. That's perfect. What was he? Civilian. He was a civilian scout, right? He went up the Crow's Nest. Good. He also was the one, as Cody remembered, very good, that tried to get the surgeon moving when he was laying over a dying soldier. He got the surgeon Porter on his way, and then he was shot and killed tending to that soldier himself, while Porter got to the top and ended up saving many, many lives up there. So Charlie Reynolds was quite a hero in a lot of ways. Well, he was a guide and a scout during the expedition. We told you this story. During the Reno fight, he stopped near Dr. Henry Porter, who was treating a wounded man. Reynolds tried to get Dr. Porter to begin the retreat to the bluffs, but Dr. Porter refused to leave the wounded man. And finally, Reynolds convinced Dr. Porter to retreat. He was shot in the heart and killed as Porter departed. And he saved a ton of lives by just getting Porter to the top of the hill. Who was Isaiah Dorman? I didn't talk too much about him, but he did. Blaine, do you remember who Isaiah Dorman was?
I don't.
He was related to Sitting Bull because he married a Sioux woman, but he was what?
He was black.
Oh, yeah.
What?
He was a black.
He was black. He was the only black soldier in the 7th Cavalry. He was an interpreter, and he was paid $75 a month compared to a soldier that was making $13 a month. He was making good coin working for the expedition. He was married to a Sioux woman who was known by Sitting Bull. He had his horse shot out from underneath him during the Reno fight. He was soon trapped by Indians. He was badly tortured prior to his death. He was found with many arrows shot into his body and head. He was badly slashed. He was shot in both legs with buckshot. His genitals were staked to the ground with a horse stake. That would not be fun, especially if you're alive. As Steve mentioned, an army cup was placed on his chest, half full of blood, and he was horribly mutilated. Horribly. That guy maybe suffered as much as anybody. in the whole thing. How about Bloody Knife? Who was Bloody Knife? Okay, he was half Sioux and half Arikara. He had a very poor home life with the Sioux family. He was picked on, teased, chastised, especially by eventual Sioux chief Gall. Gall was relentless to him, picked on him, bullied him when they were children. It is believed that he joined Custer to fight the Sioux, who he just absolutely hated with a passion. Okay? During the mutilization process, Bloody Knife's head was paraded around the Sioux camp. And two stories exist on how that happened. One was his head was cut off and put on the end of a stick, which was paraded through the Sioux camp after the battle. And the other story was his head was cut off and two young girls with a braid, because he had long braids, with a braid in each hand, were swinging his head around between them through the Sioux camp after the battle. So his head was either on a stick that was paraded through, or two little Sioux girls each had a braid in each hand and were swinging it through the Sioux camp. Okay? Now where's he buried? Nobody knows. He was buried in the valley somewhere by Colonel Gibbon's men, but they never identified his remains ever. Now he was shot by that tree in the Reno fight, but nobody knows where Bloody Knife was buried. No one has a clue exactly where he was buried. Okay? Okay, we talked about this. Steve Adelson talked a little bit about it, but another one of the casualties of the Reno retreat was a farrier's horse. What's a farrier? Horseshoer. And it belonged to John Sievertson. And how do they know this? In 1990, this skeleton I told you, I believe, didn't I, was found by archaeologists. They exhumed the entire skeleton. It was equipped with a saddle, a bridle, saddlebags, and farrier tools, all that had JS on them. And JS, John Sievertson, was the only farrier in the command, so obviously it was his horse. And the complete skeleton was assembled and is presently owned by Glenn Swanson, the movie produced from California. I told you that sad story, right? Okay, well, I'm going to read you a poem. We're kind of into poems. I'll read this one. It's kind of long, but I want you to re-listen to it. A guy by the name of Jeff Strebe, who was simply one of our students when we taught the course through Antioch University, in 1995-ish, okay, or whatever. He was so inspired by this story in the dig site that he wrote a poem. Now just picture this in your mind. John Sievertson, the farrier's horse, stood restive in the file, fighting the gnats that plagued him, weary from many a mile. On a furtive, frantic passage toward a dim, uncertain end, a mute, reluctant witness to the purposes of men. John Sievertson, the farrier's horse, had advanced without respite up the drainage of the Rosebud in the black and cheerless night. And when at dawn the scouts brought word the foe had come into view, bore a mutant, reluctant witness as the march was then renewed. John Sievertson, the farrier's horse, traveled on as the troop of horse around him grew wearied, gant, and drawn. And he heard the horses stumble and falter in their gaits, and bore grim, reluctant witness that Custer never waits. John Sievertson, the farrier's horse, in Reno's small command, kicked at flies and chewed his bit as Custer, bold and grand, appointed for reconnaissance and counseled with his aides, a mute, reluctant witness as the fateful plans were laid. John Sievertson, the farrier's horse, saw Benteen turn aside to reconnoiter a landscape that was empty, far and wide. He heard stridence in the orders and the words of Yellow Hair, and bore a mute, reluctant witness to the deep resentments there. What's he talking about? Custer and Benteen argued. Yellow Hair, as he was called by the Indians. John Sievertson, the farrier's horse, watched Custer split his force and send Major Reno off the bluff and up the watercourse. And the sweat rime caked his quarters and the saddle chafed his back as he bore mute, reluctant witness to the prelude of attack. John Sievertson, the farrier's horse, at the river drank his fill, and that much renewed his vigor and restored his flagging will. And he heard the major's orders, and he heard his rider sigh, and bore mute, reluctant witness as the men prepared to die. John Sievertson, the farrier's horse, pawed the yellow earth, when Sievertson reclinched his shoes and tightened up his girth, and checked his arms and equipment, and climbed across the back of a mute, reluctant witness to the doom and damned attack. John Sievertson the farrier's horse bore well his rider's weight, and though he fought against the bit, he fairly kept the rate. At the walk, then trot, then canter, then he charged against the foe, to bear mute reluctant witness to an immeasurable woe. John Sievertson the farrier's horse swept across the plain, his driving legs, his heaving lungs, brave heart and might and main. Delivered Reno's farrier to the forefront of the fray, and there mute reluctant witness bore to the carnage wrought that day. John Sievertson the farrier's horse heard now the terse command, dismount and form as skirmishers in the contest for the land. He felt his rider leave his back, he smelled the powder smoke, as Sievertson knelt in the firing line, and his big bore carbine spoke. He felt the pain across his mouth as the holder yanked his reins, and he raced with the soldier willingly across the dusty plain, toward a scanty line of timber that stood hard by to the right, where they halted in a clearing, taking shelter from the fight. Horse holders took the horses off. Okay? As the other holders gathered with their charges safe in hand, and the horses milled and called and snorted, a wild and fractious band. Above the noisy gather, they could hear the valley fire, growing nearer, ever nearer, as the skirmishers retired. They're retreating, right? Then from the fight, the firing came and bullets hit the ground. Like hail among the horses, they popped and crackled all around. And panic seized the horses as they bucked and reared and shied, and the holders couldn't hold them all, although they gamely tried. With bridle leather sundered and buckles broke apart, when John Sievertson the farrier's horse took a bullet near the heart. No man to bear into the fight, his weapons there to wield, John Sievertson the farrier's horse was loose upon the field. He bolted for a river bend using all of his strength. Two other horses followed him. He led by half a length. He pounded through the underbrush, crossed the stream he fled, and with every hopeless step he took, his hot life blood he bled. And pink foam from the muzzle dripped as he ran his race with death, and on the farther riverside he tried to catch his breath. His great sighs heaved as he fought for life alone among the trees, shuddering every limb with a weakening in the knees. His hide all slick and sweat and gore, gasping one breath then, one breath more. He heard the riders coming hard like thunder close at hand, in wild career toward the ford, the last of the soldier band. Rode desperately for safety in a mad and reckless rush, and he saw their fierce pursuers coming crashing through the brush. As he wheeled about and joined his troops as they fled the field that day, in a staggering, stumbling, desperate trot, he made his awkward way, trailing along the retreating flank through a storm of fire toward the river bank. John Sievertson the farrier's horse lay dead upon the ground, while the battle swirled around him and eddied all around. And when the sounds of conflict had all about him ceased, night fell on this tragedy for God and man and beast. 430 seasons passed above the bloody place, where the brave horse gave up his life in the grim and hopeless race. The grass has grown, the flowers bloom, the days have disappeared, and winters come and winters go into the swell of years. John Sievertson the farrier's horse here stands parade today. What remains of him is with us through his spirits far away. His bones and gear remind us of our certain common end, an eloquent indictment of the purposes of men. I thought that was an incredible poem this guy wrote, all about what Sievertson's horse saw throughout that battle. That took some talent. I've always been moved by that. Let's talk a little bit about the aftermath of the battle in Custer Hill. We didn't talk much about it. On June 27th of 1876, General Terry had reached the area of the Little Bighorn, and he sent Lieutenant James Bradley and Crow scouts from the Reno-Benteen battle site in search of Custer and his command, because they were off on a different hill, right? Well, Bradley came back from Custer Hill, and he told General Terry that he found Custer dead, and he had counted the bodies of 197 men. And the lone survivor of the battle was Comanche, Captain Keogh's horse. Bradley then was sent out again by Terry, this time with Captain Thomas Weir. Remember the guy that said permission to go to the sound of the firing, okay? When Weir and Bradley reached the dead on Custer Hill, Weir was quoted as saying, "Oh, how white they look." That's what he said. He was just about half in shock. On June 28th, the survivors had the painful task of burying Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong, Custer's command. They were buried where they fell in shallow graves. They were marked with wooden teepee poles that they had collected from the abandoned village when the Indians left the next day. At Custer Hill, a majority of the dead soldiers were stripped, badly mutilated, and scalped. As mentioned by Steve Adelson, Tom Custer could only be identified by a tattoo on his arm, which was the American flag, the Goddess of Liberty, and his initials, TWC. He lay face down, he was bristling with arrows, the back of the skull was smashed as flat as a man's hand. His throat had been cut, and the top of his head or scalp was almost completely ripped off. An arrow had been shot into the top of his head with such a force they could not pull it out. One guy couldn't pull it out. Finally, his chest was split wide open, and his heart was removed. This is Tom Custer. Boston Custer laid downhill. You saw where Tom and George Custer were. I think you might have walked down and saw where those two were. He was close to Audie Reed. Boston had been stripped except for a pair of white cotton socks. He wasn't mutilated. W.W. Cook, the guy with the long whiskers, he was scalped twice. Scalped his head and scalped his whiskers. Cook's right leg was punctured in the same fashion Sioux warriors used to mark a dead enemy. Miles Keogh was not disfigured. He laid naked except for his socks. And remember they told you that story? He had a Catholic medal around his neck. And a lot of people think that's why he was not disfigured, because they saw that he was a religious man. Okay? So those are some things that happened to them. Whatever happened to Custer? Okay, this is a pretty good story. He was stripped naked, but he was neither scalped nor mutilated. He was shot twice, once through the left side of his chest and once in the left temple. When approached by a rescue party, Custer looked as if he was asleep. When those guys saw Custer from the rescue party, Bradley and Weir, they just commented he looked like he was just asleep. Indian warriors had approached Custer and were intended to mutilate his body, but the Indian women pleaded with them to leave him alone. And so what they did is they cut off one of Custer's fingers, about right here, that was it. Okay? Now, Indian women took awls, sewing awls made out of bone, and they took them and they poked his ears out, eardrums out, so he would listen better in the afterlife, because he once said he would never attack the Sioux, and he did. Okay? Now, why was he not scalped or mutilated? And I think Hannah was walking with me, and I don't remember who was walking with me, Talon, so I won't let them answer, but there were 3 reasons why historians give that Custer was left alone. Anybody want to guess, other than somebody, if I told Talon, I'll let him maybe answer later, but anybody else want to guess why they did this? Why did they do this? They respected him as a leader. That's exactly right. Is that what you said, Cody?
No.
Oh, they respected him as a leader. Did you have another one?
Oh, I was looking at this.
Okay. Okay, what else might be a reason? That makes sense, doesn't it? He was respected as a leader. They did have some respect for leaders. What might be another reason he didn't get it? Well, that's a good guess. He told them not to take anything from the soldiers. He didn't tell them to leave them alone. Don't take their boots and don't take their things. But why was he not mutilated?
Maybe because mutilating him was just too big of a hassle. It wasn't worth their time.
You're pretty close, Will. He might have been just one of the lucky ones that did get mutilated. They didn't mutilate them all. I mean, they didn't have time. Will's exactly right. So historians thought he might have been one of the ones that would have been left alone. I find that hard to believe that they wouldn't, that would just be the case. They would either, to me, as a leader. What might be another reason? This one might surprise you. Go ahead, Cody.
He had an affair with, was it City Bulls?
That-
One of them.
Supposedly he had a sexual relationship with a Sioux woman, and her name was Mayotsi, because she had a child that had yellowish hair. And so there's a real good chance that Custer had an affair with the Sioux woman. She had bore a child, so they considered him family. So they left him alone. That's what historians think. So either out of respect, or the fact that it's pretty well documented that there was a blonde-haired baby born from Mayotsi who was seen with Custer at different times during the reservation time, you know what I mean, before they all bolted the reservation.
What did Lily think about
Libby, well, Steve told you about Libby. They were teasers. You saw in the video, if you're here, tell me what the women are wearing in Washington. I will study them carefully. They had a weird relationship, not being weird, but they like to tease each other sexually, so to speak. They were gone away from each other all the time, so they're always trying to get the other one into a little jealous rage. And I think she knew that he wasn't out there on the frontier for months, so to speak. You know what I mean? So I don't think it's a surprise. I think that's probably what the deal was. I don't know. The little baby's name, they gave the baby's name Yellowbird, and it died at the age of 1. So the baby did not live. But the name was Yellowbird, if you can imagine. And that's one of the reasons. Okay? Now let's talk about what happened to the 7th Cavalry afterwards. You know, long journey home. At the end of this deal, 52% of the 7th Cavalry were killed or wounded. 52% of the entire cavalry. Okay? 16 officers and 242 troopers were either killed in the battle or died of wounds as a result of the battle. Okay? 16 officers and 242 troopers were killed or died as a result. 1 officer and 51 troopers were wounded in the battle. Okay? So you got to kind of keep some of that in mind. Now, how about the Native American casualties? They don't know. They thought 50 killed. No, why don't we have a good taste of that? They didn't leave their dead laying. You know what I'm saying? They took them. So there's no documentation of any substantiality that tells you how many warriors were killed. They're estimated 50-ish. And we don't know how many women and children killed. We know that Gall's wife and children were all killed because his heart was what? Angry. Okay? There were some casualties, but they took care of their dead and took them. They didn't leave them on the battlefield. You could count them.